Isabella, answer me. Why are there strangers living in the Alpine chalet I bought for you 3 years ago? My grandmother Margaret's voice cut through the warmth of the Christmas Eve dinner like a blade of ice. The crystal glass she slammed onto the table didn't break, but the silence that followed shattered everything. Outside, the snow was falling softly on the aspen pines, but inside, the temperature had dropped to absolute zero. Across the table, my father, Ryan, stopped mid-laugh, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. My mother, Elizabeth, froze, her eyes widening in a panic I had never seen before. I sat there, shivering slightly in my thin sweater, completely confused. I looked at Grandma, then at my parents. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What chalet?" "I live in a damp basement apartment on the east side. I've never owned a house in my life. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." Grandma's eyes narrowed into slits. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at my parents. "You told me you were managing it for her. You told me the renters were temporary and the money was going into a trust." My father, Ryan, laughed nervously, the sound hollow and brittle. "Mother, you've been in Europe for years. You're confused. It's a corporate retreat. We're renting it out to manage the overhead costs for Isabella's future." "No," Grandma snapped, her voice rising. "I went there yesterday. The people inside said they are the in-laws of your daughter, Sydney. They said they pay $6,000 a month in rent directly to Ryan Hansen." The room spun. $6,000 a month? My bank account currently had $15 in it. I looked at my sister, Sydney. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my entire wardrobe. She turned pale, her eyes darting to our mother, pleading for an intervention. In the past, I would have cried. I would have asked if I had done something wrong to deserve this confusion. For 26 years, I had been the unlucky one, the one who wasn't good with money, the one who needed help. I believed them. I internalized their narrative. I thought my inability to get ahead was a personal failing, a character flaw that I needed to fix. That was the invisible chain they had wrapped around my neck, the constant, subtle suggestion that I was broken and they were my saviors. But looking at my father's sweating forehead and my mother's terror, the chain snapped. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't my incompetence. This was theft. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. The lines of the room sharpened, like a high-contrast filter had been applied to my vision. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, turning my blood to ice water. It was the clarity of a balance sheet finally balancing. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it next to my plate. "Dad," I said, my voice steady and low, "did you sign a lease with Brandon's parents in my name?" "It's complicated, Bella," my mother Elizabeth interjected, her voice high and shrill. "We were protecting the asset. You know how overwhelmed you get with paperwork. We didn't want to burden you." "Answer the question," I said, cutting her off. "Did you forge my signature on a lease for a property I didn't know I owned?" The silence was loud. Sydney dropped her fork. It clattered against the fine china, the sound of their perfect facade cracking. "We didn't forge anything," Sydney stammered, defensive now, her chin jutting out. "You signed a power of attorney years ago, remember? When you had that car accident?" I stared at her. The car accident where they told me they couldn't help with the medical bills because they were cash poor. The accident that ruined my credit. They had used my vulnerability to steal my future. I revoked that power of attorney the day I turned 25. I lied. I hadn't. But I needed to see their faces. My father flinched. That was all the confirmation I needed. They weren't just bad parents. They were criminals. And I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their prosecutor. "Let's be clear about what we mean by burden," I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. "I live in a basement apartment on 4th Street. It smells like mildew when it rains. I drive a car that breaks down every time the temperature drops below freezing. And I have $40,000 in medical debt from the accident you refused to help me with." My mother, Elizabeth, pressed a napkin to her mouth, her eyes darting around the table as if looking for an exit. "We helped you with rent when you first moved out," she whispered. "You paid the deposit," I corrected. $500 once, 4 years ago." I turned to Sydney. She was scrolling on her phone under the table, probably deleting the location tag on her latest post. "Sydney," I said, making her jump, "how much is the rent for your condo downtown?" "That's none of your business," she snapped. "Actually, it is," I countered, "because I saw the bank statement on Dad's desk last Christmas. $3,200 a month, paid by Hanson Family Trust, the same trust that apparently couldn't afford my physical therapy bills." Ryan's face turned a mottled red. "We have to maintain appearances, Isabella. Sydney is building a brand. That requires investment. You chose a career in graphic design. We warned you it wasn't lucrative." "And that justifies stealing $1 million asset from me?" I asked. "To fund her brand?" "We didn't steal it." Ryan slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "We managed it. You were unstable after the accident, depressed, anxious. We couldn't trust you with that kind of responsibility. We rented it out to keep it safe, to pay for the upkeep." "Safe?" Grandma Margaret finally spoke, her voice low and dangerous. "You charged Brandon's parents $6,000 a month. That's $72,000 a year. For 3 years. That's over $200,000. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Ryan. "Where is that money, Ryan? Is it safe? Or is it sitting in the driveway in the form of that new Range Rover?" The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw them for the first time without the filter of familial obligation. They weren't just selfish. They were parasites. They had fed on my failure to justify their own greed. They needed me to be the screw-up so they could feel justified in taking what was mine. "You owe me," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "Every penny of rent, every penny of interest, and the deed. Tonight." "We can't," Elizabeth sobbed, finally breaking. "The money is gone." "Gone?" Grandma Margaret repeated the word like it was a foreign object. $200,000 gone? "It's expensive to maintain our lifestyle," Ryan shouted, abandoning all pretense of calm. "Do you have any idea what it costs to keep up appearances in these circles? The club memberships, the cars, the vacations? People expect things from the Hanson family." "We did it for you girls," Elizabeth wailed, clutching her pearls. "So you could have the right connections, so you could marry well." "You mean so Sydney could marry well," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "I wasn't part of that plan, was I? I was just the collateral damage." "You were always so difficult," Ryan spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Always so emotional, so sensitive. We knew you'd just blow the money on some artistic nonsense. We were protecting the asset for the future of the family." Grandma Margaret stood up slowly. She looked at Ryan with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, but profound disappointment. "You have lied to everyone," she said softly. "But most of all, you have lied to yourselves. You convinced yourselves that robbing your own daughter was an act of love, that crippling her future was protection. That is a sickness, Ryan, a deep, rotting sickness." "We're not sick," Sydney yelled, standing up to defend her parents. "We're just trying to survive. You don't understand the pressure, Grandma. Isabella would have wasted it. She doesn't know how the real world works." "I know how the real world works," I said, standing up to face my sister. "I know that in the real world, you don't forge signatures, you don't steal from family, and you don't gaslight the people you're supposed to love into thinking they're crazy just so you can buy a new purse." I looked at my mother. "You told me I was unlucky. You told me I just didn't have the head for business. You made me believe I was broken so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about breaking me." Elizabeth sobbed harder, but it wasn't the cry of someone sorry for what they'd done. It was the cry of someone terrified of the consequences. "I'm done being your scapegoat," I said, "and I'm done being your bank." Grandma Margaret pulled a phone from her pocket. "It's time," she said into the receiver. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. A gust of wind blew snow into the room, followed by a figure in a dark overcoat. Mr. Walter stepped into the room, shaking the snow from his shoulders. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like an executioner in a bespoke suit. He carried a leather briefcase, which he placed on the sideboard with a heavy thud. "Good evening," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I believe we have some business to conclude." Ryan paled. "Walter, what are you doing here? This is a private family dinner." "Not anymore," Mr. Walter said, snapping the latches of his briefcase open. "Mrs. Margaret Hanson retained my services a week ago. We've been quite busy." He pulled out a stack of documents and laid them on the table, right next to the untouched Christmas roast. "Exhibit A," he said, sliding a paper toward Sydney. "A deed transfer for the Alpine Chalet dated 3 years ago, signed by Isabella Hanson. Or rather, signed by someone attempting to copy her signature." He pulled out a second document, a forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the signature is a forgery and remarkably similar to the handwriting of one Sydney Hanson Miller. Sydney gasped, shrinking back into her chair. I just did what Dad told me to." "Exhibit B," Mr. Walter continued, ignoring her outburst. He slid a thick stack of bank statements toward Ryan. "The account records for the Hanson Family Trust. We traced the rent payments from the chalet. Not a single cent went into savings or maintenance. It went to, let's see, a lease on a Range Rover, tuition for a social media marketing course, and significant transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange that has since collapsed." Ryan slumped in his chair, defeated. The evidence was irrefutable. It was laid out in black and white, a paper trail of their greed and incompetence. "And finally," Mr. Walter said, his voice dropping an octave, "Exhibit C." He reached into a separate folder and pulled out a single plastic sleeve document. It was charred around the edges, yellowed with age. "We found this," he said, looking directly at me, "in the bottom of a safe deposit box your father emptied this morning. It seems he missed one." He handed the document to me. My hands shook as I took it. It was a letter from the Parsons School of Design dated 5 years ago. "Dear Isabella," I read, my voice barely a whisper. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted with a full merit scholarship." I looked up, tears blurring my vision. "You told me I didn't get in. You told me I wasn't good enough." "We couldn't let you leave," Elizabeth cried out. "We needed you here. Who would have taken care of us? Who would have helped?" "Helped?" I whispered. "You burned my future. You kept me small. You kept me poor just so you could have a servant." The realization hit me with the force of an avalanche. My life, my struggle, my doubt, my failure, it wasn't real. It was manufactured. They had engineered my smallness to feed their largeness. I looked at Mr. Walter. "What are my options?" "Civilly," he said, "we can sue for fraud, embezzlement, and emotional damages. Criminally, well, forgery and grand larceny carry significant prison sentences." Ryan looked up, terror in his eyes. "Bella, please, you wouldn't put your own father in jail." I looked at the charred letter in my hand. It smelled faintly of old smoke, the scent of the life I should have had. I looked at the luxury around me, bought with my stolen life. "I wouldn't," I said, "but the prosecutor might." The room descended into chaos. "It was her idea," Ryan shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Elizabeth. "She's the one who said Isabella would leave us. She's the one who burned the letter." "You coward!" Elizabeth shrieked, her face contorted. "You spent the rent money. You're the one who lost it all on those stupid investments." "Dad made me sign the deed," Sydney wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "He said it was just paperwork. He said Isabella knew." It was the crab bucket in full effect. They were climbing over each other, clawing and biting, desperate to escape the consequences of their collective actions. "Stop it!" I yelled, my voice cutting through their noise. "Just stop!" They froze, looking at me. "I don't care whose idea it was," I said, my voice steady now. "You all benefited. You all lived in luxury while I ate ramen in a basement. You all watched me struggle and did nothing. I turned to Mr. Walter. Give me the invoice. He handed me a document. I placed it on the table in front of Ryan. $2,400,000, I said. Restitution for the rent, interest, punitive damages, and compensation for the scholarship you stole. We don't have that kind of money, Ryan gasped. Then you'll sell everything, I said coldly. The cars, the jewelry, the club memberships, and you will vacate the chalet tonight. Tonight? Elizabeth whispered. But it's Christmas Eve. It's snowing. I know, I said. I walked here in it. Now you can walk out in it. 1 year later, the fire crackled in the stone hearth of the Alpine chalet. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside, it was warm, peaceful. I sat in the armchair, a sketchbook on my lap. The design for the new community center was almost finished. Penny for your thoughts? Grandma Margaret asked, handing me a mug of hot chocolate. Just thinking, I said, smiling, about how quiet it is. Peace is expensive, she said. But you bought it. Ryan and Elizabeth were awaiting trial for fraud. Sydney had filed for bankruptcy. Brandon had divorced her. They were gone from my life, completely and permanently. But I hadn't just kept the money. The scholarship fund launches tomorrow, I said. The Phoenix Fund. For students whose families tried to clip their wings. Grandma said, nodding. Exactly. I said, we've already had 300 applicants. Kids who were told they weren't good enough. Kids whose parents spent their college funds. Kids who just need someone to believe in them. I looked out the window at the snow-covered pines. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a builder. I was using the bricks they had thrown at me to build a foundation for others. You did good, Bella, Grandma said. You turned a crime scene into a sanctuary. No, I said, closing my sketchbook. I turned a cage into a key. If this story reminded you of your own strength, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what's the one dream you're never giving up on? I read every single one.